William Thorne stepped out of the gleaming 50-story tower that housed the headquarters of Thorne Enterprises, his impeccably tailored suit a stark contrast to the gathering grey clouds above Manhattan. The winter wind cut through the city streets like a razor, but Will barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead to his next meeting, the acquisition of a struggling tech startup that would add another jewel to his corporate crown. "The car is ready, Mr. Thorne," his driver announced through his earpiece. "2 minutes, James," Will replied, pausing to check the notifications flooding his custom smartphone. The device, worth more than what most people earned in a month, displayed a stock market graph that made him smile faintly. Another successful day, another fortune made. At 52, William Thorne had achieved what most could only dream of. His financial empire spanned 3 continents, his net worth fluctuated in the billions, and his name regularly appeared in Fortune magazine's lists of most influential business leaders. He had a Manhattan penthouse with a view that tourists paid to glimpse from observation decks, a summer house in the Hamptons, and vacation properties scattered across the globe that he rarely visited. What he didn't have was someone waiting for him at home. The thought surfaced unexpectedly as Will tucked his phone away, an intrusive reminder he quickly dismissed. Loneliness was a luxury tax on success, one he had long ago accepted as a necessary sacrifice. His divorce 15 years ago had been as efficient as everything else in his life. Clean, quick, and managed by a team of the city's most expensive lawyers. No children to complicate matters, just the dissolution of a partnership that had become another business arrangement, signed away with the same pen he used for mergers and acquisitions. "Mr. Thorne, your 3 o'clock with the board has been moved up." Lauren's voice came through his earpiece, his executive assistant, as precise and indispensable as always. "They're waiting in the conference room." Will checked his watch, a rare antique timepiece worth 6 figures. "Tell them I'll be 10 minutes late. The Richardson portfolio needs my attention first." He knew the board would wait. Everyone waited for William Thorne. Time itself seemed to bend to his will, adjusting to his schedule rather than the other way around. He moved through the world expecting it to accommodate him, and it usually did. As he prepared to cross the plaza toward his waiting vehicle, a small movement caught his eye. In the small public seating area near the building's entrance, partially sheltered from the biting wind, sat a child, a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, her small frame bundled in a coat that had clearly seen better days. She wasn't begging or causing any disturbance, just sitting quietly, her hands tucked into her sleeves for warmth. Will's first instinct was to keep walking. New York was full of uncomfortable realities, and his substantial charitable donations were his way of addressing them without direct involvement. His foundation distributed millions annually to various causes, a fact his PR team made sure appeared in the right publications, yet something made him pause. Perhaps it was the unusual stillness of the child, or the incongruity of her solitary presence in the corporate plaza. Whatever the reason, Will found himself altering his path, moving toward the bench where she sat. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his tone more abrupt than he intended. Business efficiency was a habit that extended to all his interactions. The girl looked up, and Will was struck by the clarity in her eyes, large, brown, and startlingly direct. There was no fear in her gaze, just a calm assessment that made him feel strangely transparent. "My grandma is sick today," she answered in a clear voice. "She usually comes with me." Will frowned. "Comes with you where? Shouldn't you be in school?" "It's teacher planning day," the girl explained, "and Grandma usually brings me to the library over there." She pointed toward the public library several blocks away, but she couldn't walk that far today. Something about her composure unsettled Will. Children in his limited experience were chaotic, demanding creatures. This one spoke with the measured consideration of someone much older. "What's your name?" he found himself asking. "Emily Carter, sir." The formality in her young voice was another surprise. "And you're sitting here because—" Emily's small shoulders lifted in a slight shrug. "It's nice here, clean, and I can see the people. Grandma says it's good to rest somewhere beautiful when you can." Will glanced around at the sterile corporate plaza with its geometric planters and minimalist benches, designed more to discourage loitering than to welcome visitors. Beautiful was not the word he would have chosen. "Where do you live, Emily?" "In the Bronx," she replied. "On Westchester Avenue." The address registered immediately in Will's mind, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, worlds away from his penthouse 30 blocks south. An unexpected twinge of something, responsibility, discomfort, made him reach for his wallet. He extracted a $100 bill, more money than he usually carried, but still pocket change to a man of his wealth. "Here," he said, extending the money. "Take this for your grandmother, for medicine or whatever she needs." The girl looked at the money, then back at Will's face. The directness of her gaze made him feel strangely exposed, as though she was seeing past his carefully constructed facade to something he kept hidden even from himself. "I don't need money, sir," she said softly. "Could I have a hug instead?" The request hit Will like a physical blow, so unexpected that he actually took a half step backward. A hug? When was the last time anyone had asked him for something so personal? His interactions were transactional. Services rendered, payments made, contracts signed. Even his infrequent dates were carefully choreographed experiences that rarely progressed beyond polite kisses goodnight. "A hug?" he repeated, certain he had misheard. Emily nodded, her expression entirely serious. "I haven't had a real hug in a long time. Grandma tries, but she's not strong enough anymore to hug tight." Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Sometimes a hug helps more than anything else. Will stood frozen, the $100 bill still extended between them, feeling foolish and strangely shaken. Around them, the plaza continued its rhythmic business day pulse, people striding purposefully, phones to their ears, the background hum of a city that never paused. Yet in that moment, time seemed suspended in the space between him and this child, who wanted the one thing he was least prepared to give: human contact without an agenda. "Mr. Thorne?" Lauren's concerned voice came through his earpiece. "The board is asking for an updated arrival time." Will reached up and switched off his earpiece, a gesture so uncharacteristic that he hardly recognized his own action. The $100 bill found its way back to his wallet. He looked at Emily Carter, this small person who had somehow pierced the invisible barrier he maintained between himself and the world, and made a decision that would alter the course of his carefully controlled life. Will's tailored suit suddenly felt restrictive, his tie too tight. The absurdity of the situation struck him. William Thorne, whose handshake could seal billion-dollar deals, paralyzed by a child's request for a hug. "I don't really," he began, but trailed off at the sight of Emily's unwavering gaze. Something about her reminded him of himself at that age, before the boarding schools and the relentless drive toward success had hardened him. He'd been a serious child too, with eyes that saw too much. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, like a bubble from the depths of a still pond. With awkward formality, Will lowered himself to the bench beside Emily. His body moved stiffly as he extended his arms in a gesture that felt foreign to his muscles. Emily didn't hesitate. She slipped her small arms around his neck and squeezed with surprising strength. The contact was a shock to his system. When was the last time he'd been touched without purpose? A handshake to close a deal, a brief embrace at a society function. All choreographed, all meaningless. This was different. The child's hug was given with complete sincerity, asking nothing in return but the same. Will found his arms tightening around her small frame. She smelled of inexpensive soap and the cold winter air, nothing like the designer perfumes that surrounded him in his usual circles. Her worn coat was soft against his hands, its fabric thinned by too many washings. The embrace lasted only seconds, but Will felt something shift inside him, like a door long rusted shut had been forced open just a crack, letting in a sliver of unfamiliar light. Emily pulled back, a smile transforming her solemn face. "Thank you, sir. That was a really good hug." Will stood quickly, smoothing his suit jacket with hands that weren't quite steady. "You're welcome," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. He glanced at his watch, a reflexive action. "I have to go now. A meeting." "I know you're important," Emily said with the matter-of-fact certainty of a child. "I saw your picture on a magazine at the grocery store." Will nodded at a loss for words. What did one say to a child who asked for hugs instead of money? His extensive education and decades of business experience had prepared him for every situation except this one. "Will you come back sometime?" Emily asked, her directness cutting through social conventions as only children can. "I'm usually here on teacher planning days." Will hesitated, caught between honesty and kindness. "I'm very busy." Emily nodded, unsurprised. "Adults usually are. That's okay. Will turned to leave, then paused. Does your grandmother know where you are? Yes, sir. She knows I sit here because it's safe and I can see the library from here. She just couldn't walk with me today. The thought of this child making her way alone through the city streets made Will frown. How did you get here? Bus, Emily said. I've been taking it with Grandma since I was 5. I know which one. Will nodded, oddly reassured by her competence, while simultaneously disturbed by its necessity. Children Emily's age in his social circle were chauffeured to private schools and supervised playdates. They didn't navigate public transportation alone or sit in corporate plazas waiting for grandmothers too ill to accompany them. Goodbye, Emily Carter, he said finally, the formality of using her full name a reflexive distance-keeping measure. Goodbye, Mr. Thorne, she replied with equal formality, but her smile remained warm. Will turned and strode toward his waiting car, switching his earpiece back on as he moved. Immediately, Lauren's voice filled his ear, a note of unusual concern breaking through her professional tone. Mr. Thorne, is everything all right? The board is... Reschedule the board meeting, Will interrupted, an unprecedented command that he knew would send ripples of confusion through his carefully structured corporate world. And clear my schedule for the remainder of the afternoon. Sir? Lauren's surprise was evident even through the small earpiece. In 15 years as his assistant, she had never heard such an instruction. Family emergency, Will said, the lie coming easily despite its irony. Family was the one thing conspicuously absent from his life. As his driver held the car door open, Will looked back at the plaza. Emily still sat on the bench, her small figure dwarfed by the towering glass and steel structures surrounding her. She raised her hand in a small wave. Will hesitated, then lifted his own hand in acknowledgement, before sliding into the back seat of his luxury vehicle. As the car pulled away from the curb, he found himself staring at his hand as if it belonged to someone else. Where to, Mr. Thorne? James asked from the driver's seat, his eyes meeting Will's in the rear-view mirror. Will realized he had no destination in mind, a novel experience for a man whose days were planned in 15-minute increments. Just drive, he said. I need to think. As the car merged into Manhattan traffic, Will leaned back against the leather seat and closed his eyes. The sensation of Emily's hug lingered, a ghost of warmth against his chest. What was happening to him? One unexpected encounter with a child, and suddenly he was canceling board meetings and drifting aimlessly through the city. He opened his eyes and pulled out his phone, reflexively checking the stock ticker. The numbers scrolled by, but for once they failed to hold his attention. Instead, his mind kept returning to Emily Carter from the Bronx, with her too-adult composure and her simple request for human connection. Will pressed a button on the car's console. James, take me to the Bronx. Westchester Avenue. Sir? The driver's surprise matched Lauren's earlier reaction. You heard me, Will said, his tone brooking no argument. And call my security team. I want someone to find out about an Emily Carter and her grandmother. They live somewhere on Westchester Avenue in the Bronx. I need their exact address and background information. Yes, sir. Right away. As the car changed direction, heading north toward a part of the city Will hadn't visited in decades, he tried to rationalize his actions. Perhaps this was some sort of midlife crisis, a temporary aberration that would pass once he'd satisfied his curiosity. Or maybe it was just guilt, the kind wealthy people occasionally felt when confronted with evidence of inequality, usually soothed by writing a check to a suitable charity. But neither explanation rang true. There was something about that child, something in her direct gaze and unusual wisdom, that had pierced the armor he'd spent decades constructing. The hug she'd requested had been like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed, opening a door to feelings he'd long since walled away. His phone rang, the private line reserved for his most important contacts. The name of his business partner flashed on the screen, Robert Jenkins, calling no doubt to question why Will had suddenly cancelled a board meeting for the first time in the company's history. Will silenced the phone without answering. Another unprecedented action. Whatever was happening to him, he needed time to process it before facing the inevitable questions. The sleek black car continued its journey northward, carrying William Thorne farther and farther from the world he knew into territory both geographical and emotional that he had never intended to explore. By the time they crossed into the Bronx, Will's security team had already texted him an address. a rundown apartment building on Westchester Avenue near Southern Boulevard. The contrast between this neighborhood and the gleaming financial district couldn't have been more stark. Neglected buildings, littered sidewalks, and an atmosphere of grinding poverty that was almost palpable. "Wait here," Will instructed, as James pulled up across from the address. "Keep the engine running." "Sir, I really don't think you should go alone in this neighborhood," James protested, concern evident in his voice. Will almost smiled at the irony. He had negotiated with ruthless corporate raiders and outmaneuvered business rivals without fear, yet his driver thought him in danger from a neighborhood of struggling families. "I'll be fine," he said, stepping out of the car before James could object further. The cold air hit him with renewed force, carrying unfamiliar scents, cooking spices, motor oil, the acrid tang of old garbage. Will stood for a moment, absorbing the reality of where Emily Carter spent her nights, so different from his climate-controlled penthouse with its private elevator and round-the-clock security. He crossed the street and approached the building, its facade crumbling in places, graffiti marking one side. A group of teenagers eyed him suspiciously, taking in his expensive coat and polished shoes, a wealthy anomaly in their daily landscape. Will hesitated at the entrance, suddenly uncertain. What exactly was he doing here? What did he expect to accomplish by this impulsive visit? He had no plan, no clear objective, a first in his meticulously organized life. Before he could decide whether to proceed or retreat, the building's door opened. An elderly woman emerged, leaning heavily on a worn wooden cane. Her face was lined with years of hardship, but her eyes, the same clear, direct eyes as Emily, showed strength despite her physical frailty. Those eyes widened in recognition as they landed on Will's face. "You're the man from Emily's magazine," she said, her voice rough but dignified. "The billionaire, Thorne." Will nodded, strangely at a loss for words, another novel experience for a man accustomed to commanding every conversation. The woman studied him with the same directness her granddaughter had shown. "What are you doing in this neighborhood, Mr. Thorne? People like you don't usually find their way here unless they're buying up buildings to tear down." "I met your granddaughter today," Will replied, his usual commanding tone softening slightly. "Emily. She was sitting in the plaza near my building." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "Is she all right? Did something happen?" "She's fine," Will assured her quickly. "She mentioned you were ill and couldn't accompany her to the library." Relief relaxed the deep lines in the woman's face. "She's a good girl, independent. I hated not going with her, but my arthritis—" She gestured vaguely with her free hand, dismissing her own discomfort as unimportant. "I'm Margaret Carter. Most people call me Maggie." Will found himself extending his hand, a business gesture that felt oddly formal in this context. "William Thorne." Maggie accepted the handshake with surprising firmness. Her hands were rough, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, but her grip was dignified and direct, like her granddaughter's hug had been. "Emily should be home soon," she said, glancing down the street. "Unless she's lost track of time at the library again. That child and her books." A smile softened her face, revealing the ghost of the beauty she must have been in her youth. An awkward silence fell between them, two people from vastly different worlds with no obvious reason to be conversing on a crumbling Bronx sidewalk. "Would you like to come up?" Maggie finally asked, her innate politeness apparently overcoming her initial wariness. "Our place isn't much, but I just made tea." Will hesitated. His security training warned against entering unknown locations without advance reconnaissance. Yet something about Maggie Carter's dignity made declining feel like an insult. "Thank you," he said, surprising himself again. She led him into the building, moving slowly with her cane. Will automatically extended his arm for support, another unfamiliar gesture that seemed to come from some long-dormant part of himself. The elevator was out of order. 3 months now, Maggie explained matter-of-factly, so they climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, pausing frequently for Maggie to rest. Will found himself wondering how she managed this journey multiple times a day, especially with her arthritis. Their apartment was small but impeccably clean, every surface polished. The few pieces of worn furniture arranged with care. Family photos lined one wall, Emily at various ages, and older pictures of a younger Maggie, with a man Will assumed was her husband. There were also pictures of a woman who looked like an older version of Emily, presumably her mother. "My daughter Clara and her husband," Maggie said, following his gaze. They moved to California for work 3 years ago. Emily stayed with me so she wouldn't have to change schools. They send money when they can. Will nodded, reading between the lines of this simple explanation. Financial hardship, family separation, sacrifices made for stability, realities far removed from his own experience. "Please sit," Maggie gestured to a faded armchair while she moved to the tiny kitchenette. "The tea's nothing fancy, just regular black tea." Will lowered himself into the chair, feeling strangely large and out of place in the modest room. His watch, worth more than probably everything in this apartment combined, suddenly felt heavy on his wrist, an uncomfortable reminder of the vast gulf between his world and this one. Maggie returned with 2 mugs of tea, placing one on the small table beside Will. He noticed her hands trembling slightly with the effort and felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Was it compassion? He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt genuine concern for another person's discomfort. "Emily asked me for a hug today," he said abruptly, the words escaping before he could consider them. "Not money. A hug?" Maggie smiled, settling carefully into a chair opposite him. "That sounds like her. Emily sees things differently than most folks. Always has, even before—" She trailed off, taking a sip of her tea. "Before what?" Will asked, genuinely curious. Maggie studied him for a moment, as if deciding how much to share with this stranger who had unexpectedly appeared in their lives. "Before we lost everything," she finally said. "We weren't always like this, Mr. Thorne. I was a teacher for 30 years. My husband owned a small electronics repair shop. We had a house in Queens, savings, plans for retirement." She gestured around the modest apartment. "Then my husband got sick, cancer. The insurance didn't cover all the treatments. By the time he was gone, so was everything else. The house, the shop, the savings. All gone to medical bills and debt collectors." Will shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct accounts of personal hardship. In his world, financial ruin was discussed in abstract terms: quarterly reports, risk assessments, bankruptcy proceedings, not in terms of human cost. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't be," Maggie replied with quiet dignity. "We had 40 good years together. That's more than many get. And I have Emily." Her expression softened. "That child has been my saving grace. Never complains, even when there's not much for dinner. Helps me around the apartment, gets straight A's in school." Pride illuminated her tired face. "For the teachers say she could go to college on scholarship if she keeps it up." Will sipped his tea, giving himself time to process this information. Emily wasn't just a child who had randomly crossed his path. She was a bright, resilient young person, persevering despite circumstances that would challenge most adults. "What exactly brings you here, Mr. Thorne?" Maggie asked directly, her teacher's instinct for cutting through pretense evident in her tone. "I doubt it was just to tell me my granddaughter asked you for a hug." The question caught Will off guard. What had brought him here? He still wasn't entirely sure himself. "I wanted to make sure she got home safely," he answered, which was partly true. Maggie's raised eyebrow suggested she wasn't convinced. "Emily's been navigating this city since she could walk. She knows how to stay safe. She shouldn't have to," Will said, the words emerging with unexpected force. "A child her age shouldn't have to be that self-sufficient." "Maybe not," Maggie agreed, her tone sharpening slightly. "But that's the reality for a lot of children, Mr. Thorne. Not everyone has the luxury of chauffeurs and private schools." Will felt the gentle rebuke in her words. Of course, he knew poverty existed, in an abstract, statistical way. His foundation donated millions to various causes addressing social inequality. But sitting here in this clean but threadbare apartment, with a proud grandmother who had lost everything except her dignity, the reality struck him with uncomfortable force. "I'd like to help," he said impulsively. Maggie's expression closed immediately. "We don't need charity, Mr. Thorne." "Not charity," Will clarified quickly, recognizing the pride in her response. "An investment." Maggie's eyebrows rose. "An investment? In what, exactly?" "In Emily's future," Will said, warming to the idea as he spoke. "You said yourself she's bright. College material. I have connections with the best schools. I could establish a trust for her education." He watched Maggie's face carefully, expecting gratitude or at least interest. Instead, he saw guarded consideration, as if she were evaluating a complex proposal. "And what would you want in return?" she asked finally. In my experience, Mr. Thorne, nothing comes without strings attached. The question stunned Will into momentary silence. In his world, financial assistance was a transaction that bought influence, control, or at minimum, gratitude. Maggie Carter was offering none of these. "I don't want anything," he said, surprised to find he meant it, except perhaps... He hesitated, unsure how to articulate the strange impulse that had brought him to the Bronx. Except to see her occasionally, to know she's doing well. Before Maggie could respond, the apartment door opened and Emily entered, a library book clutched to her chest. She stopped short at the sight of Will sitting in their living room, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Thorne," she exclaimed, "you came to visit us." The genuine pleasure in her voice touched something in Will that had been dormant for decades. When was the last time anyone had been truly happy to see him, not because of what he could provide or decide, but simply because of who he was? "Hello, Emily," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely." Emily smiled, placing her library book carefully on a small shelf already crowded with worn volumes. "I take the bus every day. It's easy." She crossed to her grandmother and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. "Are you feeling better, Grandma?" "Much better now that you're home," Maggie replied, her expression softening. "Mr. Thorne and I were just having tea and getting acquainted." Emily turned to Will, her direct gaze meeting his. "Did you cancel your important meeting to come here?" Will blinked, surprised by her perception. "Yes, actually, I did." Emily nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "That was kind of you." The simple statement hit Will with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had called him kind? Successful, shrewd, brilliant. These were the adjectives that usually surrounded his name. But kind, that was a quality he had long ago sacrificed on the altar of ambition. "Emily," Maggie said, "why don't you show Mr. Thorne your school project while I start dinner?" Emily's face lit up. "Yes, it's about renewable energy. I got an A+. She disappeared into what Will assumed was her bedroom, returning moments later with a carefully constructed model of a wind farm, complete with tiny turbines that actually turned when she blew on them. As Emily explained her project, her intelligence and enthusiasm evident in every word, Will found himself genuinely impressed. This child, despite every economic disadvantage, possessed a curiosity and work ethic that rivaled any Ivy League graduate he'd ever hired. "That's remarkable, Emily," he said when she finished her demonstration. "Have you thought about what you want to do when you grow up?" "I want to be an environmental engineer," she replied without hesitation. "I want to help fix the planet before it's too late." Will felt something shift inside him again, that same rusty door opening a little wider, letting in more of that unfamiliar light. Here was a child with every reason to focus on immediate needs, yet she was dreaming of solving global problems. "That's an admirable goal," he said softly. Emily studied him with those direct eyes. "What did you want to be when you were my age, Mr. Thorne?" The question caught him off guard. I wanted to build things," he admitted, recalling a long-buried ambition. "Buildings that would change skylines, structures that would last for generations." "And did you?" Emily asked. Will thought about the corporate empire he had constructed, the acquisitions, the mergers, the wealth accumulated. Buildings, yes, but hollow ones. Structures designed to generate profit, not to serve humanity. "Not in the way I imagined," he answered honestly. From the kitchen area, Maggie watched their interaction with thoughtful eyes, her expression unreadable. Will met her gaze across the small apartment and saw in it a question he couldn't quite decipher, but also a cautious openness that hadn't been there before. As the winter afternoon light faded outside the apartment's single window, William Thorne, master of the financial universe, found himself inexplicably content in this humble Bronx apartment, discussing renewable energy with an 8-year-old visionary who had asked for a hug instead of his money. "Would you like to stay for dinner, Mr. Thorne?" Maggie asked as she stirred something on the small stove. "It's just soup and sandwiches, nothing fancy." Will checked his watch automatically, a reflex action rather than a conscious choice. He had 3 missed calls from Lauren, 5 from Robert, and numerous text notifications. His entire corporate ecosystem would be in disarray by now, wondering what had happened to the man whose schedule was typically planned down to the minute. "I should get back," he said reluctantly, surprising himself with the genuine regret in his voice. Emily's face fell slightly, though she tried to hide her disappointment. "Will you come visit again sometime?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Will looked at Emily, then at Maggie, who was watching him with cautious consideration. "Yes," he said, another decision made without his usual careful deliberation. "If that would be all right with your grandmother." Maggie nodded slowly. "You're welcome to visit, Mr. Thorne. But I meant what I said earlier. We don't accept charity." Will recognized the pride in her statement, a kind of dignity that had nothing to do with material possessions and everything to do with self-respect. It was something his wealth had insulated him from understanding until now. "Not charity," he reiterated. "An investment." He reached for his business card case, extracted a card, and wrote his private number on the back. "Please call me if you need anything. Anything at all." Maggie accepted the card with a small nod, but made no promises. As Will prepared to leave, Emily approached him, her expression serious. "Can I give you another hug, Mr. Thorne?" "For the road." Something warm expanded in Will's chest, an unfamiliar sensation that was almost painful in its intensity. "I'd like that very much, Emily." This time the hug felt less awkward, more natural. Will found himself enveloping the small girl in a protective embrace, inhaling the simple scent of her shampoo, feeling the trust in her small arms wrapped around his waist. It was a moment of pure human connection, untainted by transaction or expectation, perhaps the first such moment he had experienced in decades. "Thank you for visiting us," Emily said as she released him. "It made today special." Will nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. He shook Maggie's hand, promised again to return soon, and made his way back down the 4 flights of stairs and out to the street where James waited with the car. "Everything all right, sir?" James asked, as Will slid into the back seat. "Yes," Will replied absently, his mind still in that small apartment with its faded furniture and warm heart. "Take me back to the office." As the car pulled away from the curb, Will looked back at the building. Emily stood at the window waving. He raised his hand in response, watching until they turned a corner and she disappeared from view. The return to Manhattan was like crossing into another dimension. The gleaming towers of the financial district rose before him, monuments to wealth and power that had defined his existence for so long. Yet somehow they seemed less impressive now, their sparkle dimmed by the memory of a child's genuine smile and a grandmother's quiet dignity. Lauren was waiting in his office, her professional composure barely containing her concern. "Mr. Thorne, the board has rescheduled for tomorrow morning. Mr. Jenkins is quite perturbed, and the Richardson team has been calling every 15 minutes. Will nodded, settling behind his desk, a massive piece of furniture chosen specifically to create psychological distance between himself and anyone sitting across from him. "Thank you, Lauren. Please inform Robert that I'll call him this evening. The Richardson deal can wait until tomorrow." Lauren's carefully maintained professionalism slipped just slightly, revealing her surprise. "Sir, the deadline for the Richardson offer is midnight tonight." "Then they'll have to extend it," Will replied with the calm authority that had built his empire. "Some things are more important." Lauren looked as if she wanted to question this unprecedented statement, but thought better of it. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yes," Will said, an idea forming. "I need you to contact our HR department. I want to create a new position, something in community relations that could be done remotely or part-time with flexible hours. Something suitable for a former teacher with extensive experience but limited mobility." Lauren's eyes widened slightly as she made the connection. "This is related to your family emergency this afternoon." Will almost smiled at her diplomatic phrasing. "Yes. I also want you to research the best private schools in the Bronx area, elementary level, and set up a meeting with the head of the Thorne Foundation for tomorrow afternoon." Lauren nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Anything else, sir?" Will considered for a moment. "Yes. Send flowers to this address." He wrote down the Carter's apartment number on Westchester Avenue. "Nothing ostentatious, something thoughtful. And include a note inviting them to dinner at my penthouse this Saturday evening." As Lauren left to execute his instructions, Will turned to the wall of windows behind his desk. The city spread out before him, lights beginning to twinkle in the early winter dusk. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, in a small apartment in the Bronx, Emily Carter was probably helping her grandmother with dinner, or perhaps reading one of her library books by the window where he'd last seen her. The thought brought an unfamiliar warmth to his chest, that same expanding sensation he'd felt when she hugged him goodbye. What was happening to him? One chance encounter with a child, and suddenly he was reorganizing his priorities, creating jobs, researching schools. His phone rang. Robert Jenkins again, no doubt furious about the cancelled board meeting and Will's uncharacteristic disappearance. Will let it go to voicemail. Whatever corporate crisis Robert perceived could wait. For the first time in memory, William Thorne had something more important on his mind than business. The next morning, Will arrived at his office earlier than usual. He had spent a restless night, his thoughts repeatedly returning to the Carters and their situation. By dawn, he had formulated a plan, not charity as Maggie had proudly rejected, but something he hoped would preserve their dignity while genuinely improving their circumstances. Lauren met him at the elevator, tablet in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. The flowers were delivered yesterday evening. I have scheduled the meeting with the Thorne Foundation at 2, and I've compiled information on 3 private schools in the Bronx area with excellent academic records." She handed him a folder. "Also, HR has drafted a job description based on your parameters. They've titled it Educational Outreach Coordinator." Will nodded approvingly. Lauren's efficiency was one of the reasons she had survived as his assistant far longer than any of her predecessors. "Thank you. Has there been any response to the dinner invitation?" "Not yet, sir." Lauren hesitated, then added, "The board is assembling in the conference room. Mr. Jenkins arrived 20 minutes ago and has been expressing his concerns rather vocally." Will smiled slightly. "I imagine he has." He straightened his tie and headed toward the conference room, mentally shifting gears from the personal concerns that had occupied his thoughts to the corporate arena he had mastered long ago. The board meeting proceeded exactly as Will had expected. Robert Jenkins, his longtime business partner and the company's CFO, demanded an explanation for yesterday's unprecedented cancellation. The other board members, most of whom owed their considerable wealth to Will's business acumen, watched the exchange with wary interest. "A personal matter required my immediate attention," Will stated simply. "It won't happen again." Robert, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and the aggressive posture of someone who had fought his way to the top, leaned forward. "Personal matter? Since when do you have personal matters that take precedence over a board meeting, over the Richardson deal?" The implied criticism would once have angered Will. Today it merely amused him. How small Robert's concerns seemed compared to the quiet dignity of Maggie Carter or the hopeful resilience of her granddaughter. "Since yesterday," Will replied calmly. "Now, shall we proceed with the agenda? I believe we were discussing the Robinson acquisition." Robert continued to glower, but the meeting moved forward. Will participated with his usual incisive intelligence, steering the discussion toward the decisions he favored. On the surface, nothing had changed. He was still William Thorne, corporate titan, master of the boardroom. Yet inside, something had shifted fundamentally. The decisions being made around this polished table suddenly seemed less consequential than they had just 24 hours ago. The millions of dollars being moved from one column to another were just numbers on a page compared to the real-world impact of providing a secure future for one bright child and her ailing grandmother. When his phone vibrated with a text message during a particularly tedious presentation, Will glanced down discreetly. It was from Lauren. "Miss Carter called. They accept your dinner invitation. Saturday at 7. A smile touched Will's lips before he could suppress it, a genuine expression of pleasure that drew curious glances from several board members unused to seeing such human emotion from their chairman. "Something amusing about the quarterly projections, Will?" Robert asked acidly. Will composed his features back into their usual impassive mask. "Not at all. Please continue." The meeting concluded 2 hours later with every agenda item addressed and every decision made exactly as Will had intended. Despite his distracted thoughts, his business instincts remained razor-sharp. He had built this empire through intelligence and determination, qualities that remained undiminished even as new emotions began to crack the ice around his heart. As the board members filed out, Robert lingered behind, closing the conference room door once they were alone. "What's going on with you, Will?" he demanded without preamble. "First you disappear yesterday, now you're smiling at your phone during presentations. This isn't like you." Will considered his old friend and business partner. They had built Thorne Enterprises together, starting with nothing but ambition and drive. But somewhere along the way, Robert had become as cold and focused on profit as Will himself, perhaps even more so. "I met someone," Will said simply. Robert's expression shifted from concern to understanding. "Ah, a woman, that explains it." He relaxed visibly. "Just don't let it interfere with business. The Richardson deal nearly fell apart yesterday." "But it didn't," Will pointed out. "And it's not a woman, at least not in the way you mean." Robert's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Then what?" Will hesitated. How could he explain Emily Carter to someone like Robert? How could he articulate the profound effect of a child's simple request for human connection? Robert, who measured everything in terms of profit and loss, would never understand. "It's complicated," Will said finally, "but it's making me see things differently. Our business, our priorities." Robert's expression darkened. "Our priority is maximizing shareholder value. That's what built this company. That's what pays for your penthouse and your art collection and your private jet." "Yes," Will agreed. "And what's the point of all that if—" He stopped himself, realizing the futility of trying to explain his epiphany to Robert. "Never mind. The business isn't suffering, Robert. If anything, I'm seeing new opportunities we've been missing." "What opportunities?" Robert asked suspiciously. Will thought about Emily's renewable energy project, her ambition to become an environmental engineer, sustainable investments, educational initiatives, things that build value over decades, not just quarters. Robert snorted. "Sounds like bleeding heart nonsense to me. Leave that to the non-profits. We're here to make money." Will studied his old friend, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Had he himself sounded so coldly pragmatic just days ago? Probably. It was sobering to see his former mindset reflected back at him. "We can do both," Will said quietly. "Make money and make a difference." Robert shook his head. "Don't go soft on me, Will. This company needs you sharp." "I'm sharper than ever," Will replied, rising from his chair to signal the end of the conversation. "Just focused on a bigger picture." As Robert left, grumbling about second quarter projections and market volatility, Will turned to the windows overlooking the city. The Bronx was just visible in the distance, a patchwork of buildings so different from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. Somewhere in that landscape, a little girl was probably sitting in a classroom, raising her hand to answer a question about renewable energy or mathematics or literature. A little girl whose direct gaze and simple request had somehow reached through years of carefully constructed emotional barriers to touch a heart Will had almost forgotten he possessed. Saturday evening arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation for Will. He had instructed his housekeeper to prepare a special dinner, chosen with consideration for what might appeal to an 8-year-old while still being sophisticated enough for adults. The formal dining room, with its intimidating length and austere decor, seemed inappropriate, so he had arranged for the meal to be served in the penthouse's smaller breakfast nook with its panoramic views of Central Park. Will found himself checking his watch repeatedly as 7 o'clock approached, a man accustomed to making others wait, suddenly concerned about timing. He had sent a car for the Carters, unwilling to subject Maggie to public transportation with her arthritis, though he suspected she might have preferred her independence. At precisely 7, the private elevator chimed, announcing their arrival. Will smoothed his casual sweater, another departure from his usual formal attire, and moved to greet them. The doors opened to reveal Emily, wide-eyed with wonder at the private elevator, and Maggie, her expression a careful blend of dignity and cautious curiosity. Emily wore a simple blue dress that appeared freshly ironed, her hair neatly braided. Maggie had clearly made an effort as well, dressed in what Will suspected was her best outfit, a modest navy pantsuit that had seen better days but was impeccably maintained. "Welcome," Will said, suddenly feeling strangely nervous, an emotion he couldn't recall experiencing in years. "I'm glad you could come." Emily stepped forward, her natural openness overcoming any intimidation she might have felt at the opulent surroundings. "Your house is in the sky," she exclaimed, moving immediately to the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Look, Grandma, we can see the whole park." Maggie followed more slowly, her cane tapping gently on the marble floors. Her eyes took in the spacious penthouse with its museum-quality art and designer furniture, but her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Thorne," she said formally. The flowers you sent were lovely. Will noticed she carried a small, neatly wrapped package. Following his gaze, Maggie held it out. Emily insisted on bringing you something. Will accepted the package, touched by the gesture. Thank you. You didn't need to bring anything. Grandma says we should never visit someone's home empty-handed, Emily explained solemnly. It's good manners. Will carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small hand-painted ceramic dish. The design was clearly a child's work, colorful and earnest, with thank you painted in careful letters across the center. I made it at school, Emily said, watching his reaction carefully. In art class. Here's for your keys or coins or important things. Will ran his finger gently over the uneven glaze, more moved by this simple gift than by any of the priceless artifacts he had acquired over the years. It's perfect, he said sincerely. I'll keep it on my dresser for my watch and cufflinks. Emily beamed, pleased by his appreciation. Will placed the dish carefully on a side table, positioning it prominently among his expensive decorative objects. Would you like a tour before dinner? He offered, gesturing to the expansive apartment. Yes, please, Emily responded enthusiastically. Maggie nodded her agreement, though Will noticed she seemed a bit overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding them. He led them through the penthouse, watching their reactions to his carefully curated world. Emily ran from window to window, exclaiming over the views, while Maggie moved more deliberately, taking in the details with quiet observation. Will found himself seeing his home through their eyes. The cold perfection of it, the absence of personal touches, the showcase quality that spoke of wealth but revealed little of its occupant. In his home office, Emily paused before a framed photograph, one of the few personal items in the entire penthouse. It showed a much younger Will standing beside an older man in front of a half-constructed building. Is that your dad? She asked, pointing to the older man. Will nodded, surprised by the twinge of emotion the photo still evoked. Yes, that was taken when we built our first office building together, before he hesitated, mindful of avoiding certain topics. Before he was gone. Emily studied the photo thoughtfully. You look happy, both of you. We were, Will admitted. He taught me everything about business, about building things that last. Did he give good hugs? Emily asked, with the direct simplicity of childhood. The question caught Will off guard. He tried to remember when his father had last embraced him, perhaps before he left for boarding school at 12, or when he graduated from college. The memories were distant, faded by time and his own emotional detachment. Not really, he answered honestly. He wasn't very demonstrative. Emily nodded sagely, as if this explained something important. That's probably why you didn't know how to hug very well at first. But you're getting better. Maggie made a small sound that might have been suppressed laughter or gentle admonishment. Emily, remember what we discussed about personal comments? It's all right, Will assured her, finding himself smiling at Emily's candor. She's right, I am out of practice. The tour concluded in the kitchen where Will's housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was putting the finishing touches on dinner. She had been with Will for over a decade, but had never seen him bring family guests home, only business associates and the occasional date. Her surprise at the presence of a child in the penthouse was evident, though she hid it professionally. Everything looks wonderful, Mrs. Chen, Will said. Thank you for preparing this special meal. Dinner was served in the breakfast nook, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the windows as night fell. Will had chosen a menu of elevated comfort foods, gourmet mac and cheese for Emily, though he'd instructed the chef to make it sophisticated enough for adults. Roast chicken, fresh vegetables, and homemade rolls. For dessert, there was chocolate cake with vanilla ice cream, a childhood favorite Will couldn't remember the last time he'd indulged in. The conversation flowed more easily than Will had anticipated. Emily chattered about school, her friends, and her latest library books, while Maggie gradually relaxed enough to share stories from her teaching days. Will found himself talking more about his own childhood than he had in years. Memories of helping his father on construction sites during summer breaks, learning to read blueprints before he could read books, the satisfaction of seeing a building rise from nothing but plans and determination. Is that why you became a builder? Emily asked, carefully cutting her chicken into precise pieces. Because of your dad. Will considered the question, realizing he'd never really examined his motivations that closely. Partly, he acknowledged, but somewhere along the way, I stopped building and started acquiring. It's not the same thing. "What's acquiring?" Emily asked, struggling slightly with the word. "It means buying things that already exist instead of creating new ones," Will explained, "like buying a painting instead of painting one yourself." Emily's nose wrinkled slightly. "That doesn't sound as fun." "No," Will agreed, surprised by his own admission. "It's not. You could go back to building," Emily suggested with the simple logic of childhood. "It's never too late to do what makes you happy." From across the table, Maggie watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes. "Out of the mouths of babes," she murmured. Will met her gaze, seeing in it a wisdom born of experience rather than wealth. "Your granddaughter has a gift for cutting through pretense." "Always has," Maggie agreed with quiet pride. "Sees right to the heart of things." As dessert was served, Will steered the conversation toward the proposal he had been formulating since their first meeting. "I've been thinking about what you said, Maggie, about not wanting charity. I respect that." Maggie's expression grew guarded. "We manage." "I know you do," Will acknowledged, "but I'd like to offer something that isn't charity." "A fair exchange." "What kind of exchange?" Maggie asked cautiously. Will took a breath, hoping his proposal would be received in the spirit intended. "The Thorn Foundation funds educational initiatives across the city. We're creating a new position, Educational Outreach Coordinator. The job would involve evaluating programs, making recommendations for improvements, and serving as a liaison between the foundation and the schools we support." He looked directly at Maggie. "With your background in education, you'd be perfect for it." Maggie's expression remained carefully neutral. "And what would this position require?" 20 hours a week, flexible scheduling. Much of it could be done remotely from home. The salary is competitive with full health benefits." Will paused. "It's real work, Maggie. Important work, not a sinecure." Maggie studied him, searching his face for any sign of condescension or pity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I'd want to see the job description. Understand exactly what would be expected." "Of course," Will agreed, relieved she hadn't dismissed the idea outright. "I'll have it sent over." Emily, who had been following the adult conversation with intense interest despite its complexity, suddenly brightened. "Does this mean we could afford internet at home?" "For research?" The question, so practical, so modest in its ambition, struck Will forcefully. In his world, high-speed internet was as basic as running water, something taken completely for granted. The reminder of these fundamental disparities was humbling. "Yes," he said, meeting Emily's hopeful gaze, "it definitely would." Emily beamed, turning to her grandmother. "And maybe new books?" "For my science project?" Maggie smiled at her granddaughter's enthusiasm. "We'll see, little one. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Will watched their interaction, struck by the love between them, a bond forged through hardship yet untainted by bitterness. Despite their circumstances, there was a warmth and authenticity in their relationship that he suddenly realized was missing from his own life. When was the last time anyone had looked at him with the pure affection Emily showed her grandmother? Had anyone ever? "There's something else," Will said, turning to Emily. "I've looked into a school called West Side Academy. It's not far from your current school, but it has special programs in science and environmental studies." He glanced at Maggie. "The Thorn Foundation sponsors scholarships there. Emily would qualify based on her academic performance." Emily's eyes widened. "A special science school?" "With advanced laboratories," Will confirmed, "and field trips to environmental research centers." Maggie's expression grew concerned. "That sounds wonderful, but would she fit in? Those private schools can be—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Would her granddaughter be accepted among wealthier peers? Will understood her concern. The scholarship covers everything: uniforms, books, school trips. And the student body is diverse by design. The foundation insists on it. Emily looked to her grandmother, hope and excitement evident in her expression. Maggie hesitated, clearly torn between wanting the best opportunities for her granddaughter and fearing the potential social challenges. "You don't have to decide now," Will assured them. "Visit the school first. Talk to the teachers and other students. See if it feels right." Maggie nodded, relaxing slightly. "That seems reasonable." As the evening progressed, Will found himself more at ease than he could remember being in years. There was something about the Carters' presence that transformed his sterile penthouse into something warmer, more like a home than a showcase. Emily's enthusiastic exploration of every room and Maggie's quiet dignity brought life to spaces that had served primarily as backdrops for Will's solitary existence. When it came time for them to leave, Will found himself reluctant to see them go. He had arranged for his driver to take them home, insisting it was no inconvenience despite Maggie's protests. At the elevator, Emily turned to him with serious eyes. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Thorne, and for the school and the job for Grandma, but mostly for being our friend." Friend. Such a simple word, yet Will couldn't remember the last time anyone had used it to describe his relationship to them. He had business associates, employees, acquaintances, but friends? That was a luxury he had sacrificed long ago on his climb to the top. "I should be thanking you, Emily," he said softly, "for the hug that day, for reminding me of what's important." Emily studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see far more than her years should allow. "You looked sad that day, not outside sad, but inside sad. Do you feel better now?" The question penetrated straight to Will's core. Did he feel better? The surprising truth was yes. The emptiness that had been his constant companion for so long had begun to fill with something new, something warm and hopeful and alive. "Yes," he answered honestly. "I do feel better." Emily nodded, satisfied, then surprised him with another hug, this one given freely without request or hesitation. Will returned it naturally, the awkwardness of their first embrace now completely gone. Maggie extended her hand, which Will shook with genuine respect. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Thorne, and for your proposals. I'll consider them carefully." "That's all I ask," Will replied. "And please call me Will." As the elevator doors closed on Emily's waving figure and Maggie's thoughtful gaze, Will turned back to his penthouse. The spaces seemed larger now, emptier without their presence. He moved to the breakfast nook, where evidence of their shared meal remained. Emily's carefully folded napkin, Maggie's half-finished tea, the chocolate cake crumbs that told the story of an 8-year-old's enthusiasm for dessert. Will picked up the small ceramic dish Emily had given him, running his fingers over its uneven surface. Such a simple gift, yet it contained something his collection of priceless art did not: genuine human connection, offered without expectation of return. He carried it to his bedroom and placed it carefully on his dresser, removing his watch and cufflinks and arranging them on its colorful surface. The handmade dish looked incongruous among the sleek, expensive furnishings, yet somehow it was the only thing that truly belonged. The weeks following that first dinner unfolded with unexpected warmth, bringing changes to Will's life that rippled outward like stones cast into still water. Maggie accepted the position at the Thorne Foundation, approaching her new role with the same dedication and intelligence that had marked her teaching career. Will arranged for a car service to transport her to and from the foundation offices 3 days a week, while the remaining hours could be completed from home on a new laptop he had provided as standard equipment for all foundation employees. Emily visited Westside Academy and fell in love with its science laboratories and environmental program. Her entrance exams confirmed what Will already knew: she was exceptionally bright, testing well above grade level in most subjects. The school administrators were impressed not only with her academic abilities, but with her poise and maturity. Emily would begin attending after the winter break. Will found himself restructuring his previously immutable schedule to include regular visits to the Carters. Sunday afternoons became sacrosanct, time reserved for taking Emily to museums, botanical gardens, or simply for walks in the park. Maggie occasionally joined them, though she often used the time to rest, her arthritis still troublesome despite the improved medical care her new health insurance provided. These outings became the highlight of Will's week. Seeing the world through Emily's curious eyes reminded him of his own childhood enthusiasm, a quality long buried beneath layers of corporate ambition and emotional armor. Her endless questions challenged him to think beyond balance sheets and quarterly projections, to consider the how and why of things he had long taken for granted. At the Natural History Museum, Emily spent hours examining the gemstone exhibit, peppering Will with questions about mineral formation and crystal structures. When he couldn't answer some of her more technical inquiries, he arranged for a private tour with one of the museum's geologists the following week. The genuine joy on Emily's face as she handled actual specimens in the research collection was more rewarding than any business deal he had ever closed. The changes in Will's life did not go unnoticed at Thorn Enterprises. Lauren adapted to his new schedule with her usual efficiency, though he occasionally caught her watching him with curious eyes when he left early for one of Emily's school events. Robert Jenkins was less accommodating, his disapproval evident in subtle jabs during meetings and not so subtle confrontations in private. "The Hanson merger needs your personal attention," Robert insisted one Friday afternoon as Will prepared to leave the office. "Their CEO specifically requested a meeting with you, not some underling." "Peterson is hardly an underling," Will replied calmly, referring to the company's talented VP of acquisitions. "He knows the Hanson portfolio better than I do at this point." "That's not the point," Robert countered, his frustration evident. "They want William Thorne, not one of his proxies. Since when do you delegate the high-profile negotiations?" Will finished gathering his papers, his movements unhurried. "Since I realized there are more important things than being physically present at every meeting." Robert's face flushed with barely contained anger. "More important things? Like what? Your mysterious personal matter that keeps taking you away from the office?" Will considered his old friend and business partner, seeing the gulf that had opened between them, not just in priorities, but in fundamental values. Once, he would have agreed with Robert's single-minded focus on business. Now he saw it as a kind of poverty. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly like that." He left Robert sputtering in his office, taking the private elevator to the parking garage where James waited with the car. Today was special. Emily's science project on renewable energy had been selected for the school's science showcase, and Will had promised to attend. The event was being held in Westside Academy's spacious auditorium, filled with proud parents and nervous students standing beside carefully constructed displays. Will felt oddly out of place among the other adults, mothers arranging last-minute details on poster boards, fathers filming with smartphones, the easy camaraderie of a community he had never been part of. He spotted Emily at her display, a more elaborate version of the wind farm model she had shown him months ago, now supplemented with solar panels and a working water wheel. She was deep in conversation with one of the judges, her hands moving animatedly as she explained her concepts. Maggie stood nearby, her face glowing with pride despite the pain Will knew she was experiencing from standing too long. He moved to join her, offering a supportive arm that she accepted with a grateful nod. "She's been working on this for weeks," Maggie said, watching her granddaughter. "Up until midnight sometimes. So I couldn't get her to bed." "It shows," Will replied, taking in the meticulous construction and careful labeling. "She's got a real gift for this." Emily spotted them and waved excitedly before returning to her presentation. The judge seemed impressed, making notes and nodding approvingly. "I never thought I'd see her in a place like this," Maggie said softly, gesturing to the well-appointed school around them. "When her mother left her with me, I was so worried I wouldn't be able to give her the opportunities she deserved." Will felt a surge of protective warmth toward both of them. She would have excelled anywhere, with you supporting her. "The school is just a tool. You gave her the foundation." Maggie gave him a sideways glance, a small smile playing at her lips. "For a ruthless businessman, you can be surprisingly insightful, Will." He chuckled, acknowledging the transformation that even he found somewhat bewildering. "I'm learning. Slowly." The awards ceremony began 30 minutes later, with Emily taking second place in her division, an impressive achievement for a new student competing against children who had been preparing all year. Will found himself applauding as enthusiastically as any parent, his usual reserve forgotten in the pleasure of seeing Emily's accomplishment recognized. Afterward, they celebrated with dinner at a casual restaurant near the school. Emily's choice rather than the upscale establishments Will typically frequented. The waitstaff knew Maggie by name, evidence that this was one of their regular spots, and Will enjoyed the novelty of being treated like any other customer rather than a VIP to be fawned over. "I've been thinking," Emily announced as she carefully cut her pizza into precise triangles. "For my next project, I want to design a better system for heating apartment buildings. Our building is always too cold or too hot, and Grandma says the landlord wastes a lot of energy." Will nodded thoughtfully. "That's an excellent practical application. Actually, Thorn Enterprises owns several properties that have implemented new energy-efficient heating systems. I could arrange a tour if you're interested." Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? Could I see how everything works?" "Absolutely. I'll have the building engineers show you the entire system. You could take measurements, ask questions. Maggie watched their exchange with a mixture of gratitude and caution. You've done so much for us already, Will. We don't want to impose on your time. Will felt a familiar pang at her words. Despite months of growing friendship, Maggie still maintained a careful boundary, accepting his help for Emily's sake, but reluctant to acknowledge how important they had both become to him. It's not an imposition, he said quietly. This is where I want to be. Later that evening, after dropping Maggie and Emily at their apartment, now equipped with reliable heating, new appliances, and high-speed internet, all installed as building upgrades to avoid Maggie's pride, Will returned to his penthouse. The space that had once seemed like the perfect expression of his success now felt hollow. Its pristine surfaces and designer furniture, a poor substitute for the worn but love-filled home the Carters had created. He wandered through the rooms, noticing for the first time how few personal touches existed in his living space. No family photos, except the single image of him with his father. No mementos or souvenirs from travels, only curated art pieces selected for their investment value. No books that had been read and reread until their spines cracked. Just leather-bound collections that looked impressive on shelves but remained untouched. The only truly personal item was Emily's ceramic dish, still holding his watch and cufflinks on the dresser. Will picked it up, running his fingers over the colorful glaze that had been applied with such care by small hands. His phone rang. Robert again, no doubt, with more complaints about his absence from the Hanson negotiations. Will let it go to voicemail, a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Whatever corporate crisis Robert perceived could wait until morning. Instead, Will moved to his home office and opened his laptop. The screensaver was a photo taken at the Natural History Museum, Emily examining a massive amethyst geode, her face alight with wonder. The image never failed to bring a smile to his face. He opened a new document and began to type, ideas flowing that had been percolating in his mind for weeks. Not a business plan or acquisition strategy, but something far more personal and potentially more significant. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking over the Manhattan skyline, bathing his penthouse in golden light. The following Monday, Will called a special meeting of the Thorn Enterprises executive team. Robert arrived last, his expression sour with barely concealed irritation. "Thank you all for coming," Will began, standing at the head of the conference table with uncharacteristic informality. "I've asked you here to discuss a new direction for Thorn Enterprises." He outlined his vision, a pivot toward sustainable development, ethical investing, and community-focused projects. The company would maintain its profitable core business, but would gradually shift resources toward initiatives that created social value alongside financial returns. Education, affordable housing, renewable energy, sectors that aligned profit with purpose. This isn't just idealism, Will assured the skeptical executives. It's smart business. The market is changing. Investors, especially younger ones, want more than just quarterly returns. They want to put their money into companies that reflect their values. Some of the executives nodded, seeing the strategic logic. Others looked uncertain, exchanging glances that conveyed their doubts. Robert's expression had hardened into open opposition. "This sounds like mission drift," he said flatly. "We're not a non-profit, Will. Our responsibility is to our shareholders, not to solving society's problems." "Why not both?" Will countered. "Imagine developments that generate strong returns while also addressing housing shortages, or energy investments that profit from the inevitable transition to renewables. We're not abandoning profit, we're redefining how we achieve it." The discussion continued for hours, with Will addressing concerns and outlining specific initiatives. By the meeting's end, most of the executive team had cautiously embraced the new vision, or at least accepted its inevitability given Will's determination. Only Robert remained openly opposed, his final words as he left the conference room heavy with warning. "The board won't support this, Will. You're risking everything we've built." Will watched him go, feeling not anger, but a kind of sad understanding. Robert was still where Will had been 6 months ago, seeing the world through the narrow lens of profit and loss, unable to imagine that business could serve a higher purpose than wealth accumulation. That evening, Will made his way to the Carters' apartment for their weekly dinner, a tradition that had begun soon after their visit to his penthouse. Emily opened the door before he could knock, her expression serious. "Grandma's having a bad day," she whispered. "Her hands hurt too much to cook." Will nodded, understanding immediately. "That's why I brought dinner," he said, holding up the bags he'd carried from the car. "And a heating pad for her hands, the kind they use at the physical therapy center." Emily's face relaxed into a smile. "You always know what we need." The simple statement touched Will deeply. To be needed, truly needed, not for his wealth or power, but for his thoughtfulness and care, was a new and precious experience. Maggie was resting in her favorite chair, her swollen hands resting on a worn cushion. She smiled at Will's entrance but couldn't hide the pain in her eyes. "I'm afraid I'm not much of a hostess today," she apologized. "Don't be ridiculous," Will replied, setting down his bags and unpacking the thermal blanket he'd brought. "You're always hosting. Tonight I'm returning the favor." He moved efficiently around the small kitchen, setting out the containers of homemade soup and fresh bread he'd had his chef prepare. As he worked, he told them about the executive meeting, describing his new vision for Thorn Enterprises. "It sounds wonderful," Maggie said, her pain momentarily forgotten in her interest. "But won't it be difficult to change the direction of such a large company?" Will nodded, appreciating her perceptiveness. "It will. Some of our investors won't understand. Some might pull out. But others will join us precisely because of this new direction." "Like the butterfly effect," Emily commented, helping to set the table. "One small change creates bigger changes later." Will smiled at her understanding. "Exactly like that. And speaking of changes," he hesitated, suddenly nervous about the idea he'd been considering for weeks. "I wanted to ask you both something important." Emily and Maggie looked at him expectantly, their expressions curious. "How would you feel about moving into my penthouse?" "Not right away," he added quickly, seeing Maggie's instinctive recoil at what sounded like charity. "But eventually, as family." The word hung in the air between them. Family. Such a simple concept, yet so profound in its implications. "I have plenty of space," Will continued, trying to fill the silence. "The East Wing is practically unused. You'd have complete privacy. Emily could have a room overlooking the park. There's an elevator, so no stairs for you, Maggie, and—" "Why?" Maggie interrupted, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Why would you want us to live with you?" Will took a deep breath, knowing that only complete honesty would suffice. "Because my home isn't a home without you in it. Because Emily has brought joy back into my life. Because—" He paused, finding the words difficult after so many years of emotional restraint. "Because I care about you both very much." Emily, who had been watching this exchange with solemn attention, spoke up. "Like a family, like you'd be my—" She hesitated, as if afraid to articulate the concept. "Not to replace your father," Will clarified gently, "but yes, like family, if that's something you both might want." Maggie's expression softened, though uncertainty remained in her eyes. "This is unexpected, Will. We need time to think about it." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need. It's just something to consider." Emily looked between the adults, her young face thoughtful. Then she moved to Will's side and slipped her small hand into his larger one, a gesture of such simple trust and affection that Will felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I think it would be nice," she said quietly, "to be a family." Will squeezed her hand gently, understanding the gift she was offering him, not just acceptance of his proposal, but something far more precious. The chance to heal the lonely child he had once been through, loving the remarkable child she was now. Spring arrived in New York City with an explosion of color in Central Park, visible from the penthouse windows that now framed a very different life than the one Will had known a year ago. The East Wing had been transformed, no longer a sterile showcase, but a warm living space filled with books, Emily's science projects, and the comfortable furniture Maggie had insisted on bringing from their old apartment. The transition hadn't been immediate. Maggie's pride and independence had required careful negotiation, culminating in a legal arrangement that preserved her dignity while addressing Will's concerns for their future. The penthouse deed now included a life estate for Maggie, ensuring her security regardless of what might happen in years to come. Emily's education was secured through a trust fund, structured to cover schooling through graduate studies if she chose to pursue them. Not charity, Will had explained when presenting the documents. Family planning. Maggie had studied the papers carefully, her former career as a teacher having taught her to read the fine print. When she finally signed, her hand steady despite her arthritis, Will felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They were truly a family now, not by blood, but by choice. The changes extended beyond his personal life. Thorn Enterprises was gradually shifting toward the sustainable model Will had envisioned, though not without resistance. Robert Jenkins had resigned in protest, taking several like-minded executives with him. The business press had been skeptical at first, publishing articles questioning Will's judgment and predicting the company's decline. But the early results were proving the critics wrong. A pilot project converting one of Thorn's older buildings to renewable energy had reduced operating costs by 30%, attracting environmentally conscious tenants willing to pay premium rents. A partnership with an educational technology startup was showing promising returns, while bringing advanced learning tools to underserved schools. Even the traditional investors were coming around as quarterly profits remained strong, despite the company's evolving focus. On this particular Saturday morning, Will sat at the breakfast table reviewing the final details for an upcoming project. Affordable housing with integrated renewable energy systems, designed to be both environmentally sustainable and economically accessible. Emily leaned against his shoulder, absorbing the blueprints with her usual curiosity. The solar panels should be angled differently, she pointed out, indicating a section of the roof design. You'd get better exposure if they faced southwest instead of due south. Will studied the area she indicated, impressed by her technical understanding. At 9 years old, Emily's grasp of environmental engineering concepts sometimes surpassed that of professionals with decades of experience. "You're right," he agreed, making a note for the architects. "That's exactly the kind of practical consideration we need." From her place at the other end of the table, Maggie watched their interaction with quiet satisfaction. Her health had improved significantly in recent months. The combination of reduced stress, better medical care, and the physical therapy sessions Will had arranged, making a noticeable difference in her mobility. "Don't forget we're meeting Clara and David at the airport at noon," she reminded them, referring to Emily's parents who were visiting from California. Will nodded, setting aside the blueprints. The relationship with Emily's parents had been complicated at first, their initial suspicion of his motives gradually giving way to cautious appreciation as they recognized the genuine bond he had formed with their daughter. The current arrangement allowed Emily to remain in New York with the educational opportunities she thrived on, while maintaining regular visits with her parents. "I've got the car scheduled," Will confirmed, "and reservations at that Italian place they liked last time." The doorbell chimed, announcing an unexpected visitor. Will glanced at his watch, puzzled. "Are we expecting someone?" Emily shook her head, already moving toward the door with the comfortable familiarity of someone completely at home. She checked the security monitor, a habit Will had instilled in her, then turned with surprise. "It's Mr. Jenkins," she announced. Will raised his eyebrows in surprise. Robert hadn't spoken to him outside of necessary business communications since his resignation 3 months ago. "Let him in, please." Robert entered the penthouse with the hesitant steps of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Though he had visited Will's home many times over the years for business dinners and strategy sessions, the transformed space, with its children's books, science projects, and family photos now prominently displayed, clearly disconcerted him. "Robert," Will greeted him, rising from the table. "This is unexpected." Robert nodded stiffly, his gaze moving from Will to Maggie and Emily. "I can come back if this is a bad time." "Not at all," Will replied, gesturing toward the living room. "Emily, would you show Mr. Jenkins to the sitting area while I get some coffee?" Emily nodded, assuming the role of hostess with natural grace. "Would you like coffee or tea, Mr. Jenkins, or maybe juice? We have orange and apple." Robert blinked, clearly surprised by the child's poise. "Coffee would be fine, thank you." Will prepared the coffee in the kitchen, giving Robert time to adjust to the domestic scene he had entered. Through the doorway, he could see Emily showing Robert her latest science project, a working model of a sustainable city powered entirely by renewable energy sources, while Maggie observed with the quiet attentiveness that characterized her interaction with guests. When Will joined them, carrying a tray with coffee and the homemade cookies, Mrs. Chen now prepared regularly at Emily's request, Robert was examining the model city with reluctant interest. "She tells me this was her science fair project," he said, as Will set down the tray. "Quite impressive for her age." "Emily won first place," Will replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. The judges said her integration of multiple energy sources was graduate-level work. Robert accepted the coffee Will offered, his expression unreadable. I see a lot has changed since I was here last. Yes, Will agreed simply. It has. An awkward silence fell between them. Two men who had once been as close as brothers, now separated by fundamentally different visions of success. I've been following the company's progress, Robert finally said, his tone carefully neutral. The Sustainable Housing Initiative is getting good press. Will nodded, recognizing this as Robert's version of an olive branch. The pre-sales have exceeded projections. Turns out there's a significant market for affordable housing that doesn't sacrifice environmental responsibility. So it seems. Robert set down his coffee cup, his movements deliberate. That's actually why I'm here. The venture fund I established after leaving Thorn is considering investments in the sustainable sector. I thought, perhaps we could discuss potential synergies. Will studied his former partner, reading between the lines of this carefully worded proposal. Robert Jenkins, the ultimate profit-driven pragmatist, was acknowledging, in his own way, that Will's vision might have merit after all. I'd be happy to discuss possibilities, Will replied, matching Robert's professional tone while suppressing a smile. Lauren can set up a meeting next week. Robert nodded, his gaze drifting to where Emily had returned to her blueprints, her small face intent with concentration. She's the reason, isn't she? He asked quietly. For all of this. His gesture encompassed not just the transformed penthouse, but the implied changes to Will's life and company. Will considered the question, its simplicity belying the complex journey of the past year. She was the catalyst, he acknowledged. The hug that broke through the walls I'd built, but the changes were already within me, waiting to happen. Emily just helped me remember what I'd forgotten. Which was, Robert prompted, genuine curiosity in his voice. That success without purpose is empty, Will replied. That connection matters more than acquisition. That what we build is only meaningful if it improves lives beyond our own. Robert absorbed this, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. I'm not sure I can go that far, he admitted. But I'm beginning to see that there might be more than one definition of success. Will nodded, accepting this limited concession as significant coming from Robert. That's a start. After Robert departed with plans set for a formal meeting the following week, Will rejoined Maggie and Emily at the breakfast table. Emily had returned to the blueprints, making careful annotations in the margins with the confidence of someone who knew her input was valued. What did Mr. Jenkins want? She asked without looking up, her attention still focused on the solar panel angles. To talk business, Will replied, resuming his seat beside her. And perhaps to understand some things. About us? Emily's perceptiveness never failed to impress him. Yes, Will admitted. About us. About how people can change when they find something more important than money or power. Emily nodded sagely, as if this were an obvious truth rather than the profound realization that had transformed Will's life. Like how you changed when you stopped being afraid of hugs, Will laughed. The sound easy and natural now where once it had been rare and restrained. Exactly like that. Maggie's phone chimed with a message alert. She checked it, then looked up with a smile. Clara says their plane just landed. They'll be through customs in about an hour. Will nodded, rising from the table. We should get ready to meet them. He paused, taking in the scene before him. Emily with her blueprints, Maggie with her quiet strength, the sunlight streaming through windows that now framed family photographs alongside the spectacular Manhattan view. A year ago, his life had been defined by acquisition and achievement, his wealth a barrier that isolated him from genuine human connection. Now, because of a child's simple request and his own unexpected response, he had discovered what truly mattered. Not what he owned or controlled, but who he loved, and who loved him in return. Emily looked up, catching his thoughtful expression. What is it? Will smiled, reaching out to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture of casual affection that now came naturally to him. I was just thinking about the day we met, about what you asked for instead of money. Emily nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. A hug. Because hugs are the real treasure. Your grandmother taught you well, Will acknowledged, glancing at Maggie with respect and gratitude. She did, Emily agreed. But you've taught me things too. Like how it's never too late to change, to become the person you're supposed to be. Will felt his chest tighten with emotion, a feeling he no longer tried to suppress or ignore. That might be the most valuable lesson of all. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Will paused in his bedroom to straighten his tie, his gaze falling on Emily's ceramic dish still holding his watch and cufflinks. The simple gift had become his most treasured possession, a daily reminder of the moment his life had begun to transform. Beside it now stood a framed photograph taken at Christmas. Will, Emily, and Maggie laughing together in front of a decorated tree, their joy evident in every line of their faces. It was the image of a family, not one formed by blood or obligation, but by something far more powerful, the choice to open their hearts to each other. "Will?" Emily called from the hallway. "Are you ready? We don't want to be late." "Coming," he replied, taking one last look at the photograph before joining them. As they rode the elevator down to the waiting car, Emily slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Maggie stood on his other side, her presence a quiet strength he had come to rely on. In that moment, surrounded by the family he had never expected to find, William Thorne, once defined solely by his wealth and power, understood the profound truth that had eluded him for most of his life. The greatest fortune isn't measured in dollars or properties or possessions. It's calculated in moments of connection, in the courage to be vulnerable, in the joy of giving without expectation of return. It had taken an 8-year-old girl asking for a hug instead of money to teach him what true wealth really meant. And for that lesson, the most valuable of his life, he would be forever grateful. Femme de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope you've been touched by the journey of William Thorne and little Emily Carter. This story reminds us that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be purchased. They can only be given freely from the heart. If you enjoyed this emotional tale of transformation, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that explore the depth of human connection. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in Will and Emily's journey resonated with you the most? We'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned. We have a special playlist of similar stories about unexpected connections that change lives forever. You'll find it linked to your left. Until next time, remember that the greatest treasures are often found in the simplest moments of human connection.